اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين. Of the people that promoted these gatherings and congregations and the lamentations in the morning was the fourth holy Imam, Al-Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. He was the reviver of these congregations, and he is one of the people that is known as those that wept, or the weepers. One of the fallacies, one of the false things that have been conjured up by other sects in Islam is the fallacy of 3 days of mourning. You've heard this, where you mourn for 3 days. Even they don't follow this. Go and look in their countries. When an Amir dies or a king dies, the television station is off and all of a sudden it's Quran for I don't know how long. They make up for all the years this person didn't listen to the Quran, and they put on the station. They don't follow this. They tell you, for example, don't commemorate something, and they'll build a statue of their leader or put pictures of their leader. And anything their leader has, like for example, Malik Abdul Aziz of the Saudi, they even have the pants that he wore, and people go get tabarruk from him if they don't have children because he had so many children or claimed to have so many children. So we've heard these claims from people before. So all these things that they tell you are innovations and not valid are things themselves that they follow and things themselves that they act upon. Why is it the focal point for concern for everybody has to always be Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam? You notice, mention to someone that Yusha ibn Nun, Joshua in the Bible, son of Nun, that there's a story in the Battle of Jericho where during the battle the sun was about to set. So Joshua put both hands in the air and he said to the sun, stand still. He didn't say, oh Allah, make the sun stand still. He put both hands in the air and said to the sun, stand still, and prolong the day so he can continue his battle. The Jews narrate this story in the Old Testament. The Christians concur with the Old Testament and say this is a legitimate teaching. The other sects of Islam also concur this story. Even the Sushis, the ones that attack all the traditions, agree with this story. And Yusha ibn Nun was who? Wasi Musa. He was the successor of Musa. But how be it when the Wasi of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, when we say that he returned the sun, they say this is a problem. So if you find the problem is always with Ahlul Bayt, attribute anything to anyone, they'll accept it. Even to ulama today, they'll tell you this alim, if they love him, when he was born in prostration. They'll say these stories, you've heard them. People say this person never committed. For example, the people that question the characteristics of the asma of the Prophet will say that this Rawi and was stayed in the state of wudu for 40 years, or this person was in a state of purity. Even people of our sect, they'll tell you, for example, a story. They'll tell you Sharif al-Radi and Sharif al-Murtada. Sharif al-Murtada said to Sharif al-Radi, he said, what do you think of a person that has not committed a sin? And they say he meant himself. And then the other one said, what do you think of a person that has not even thought of a sin? And they say the intention was of themselves. So these ulama, Fadil, were people that were considered to people that didn't even sin. Why is it when it comes to the ma'soom, all the calculations, all the considerations, everything begins to change? Why is it especially the khat of Imam Hussein alayhi salam? The majlis of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein is always the one that's attacked. You notice the month of Muharram begins and it's all about attacking these majlis. In fact, you see people that claim to be servants of the khat, ulama, and they will tell you after the 10th of Muharram, you should take away the sawad. That's what they'll say. You know, start celebrating, be joyous, be normal. And I'm certain when their father dies, or their alim that they think is above all dies, they won't be celebrating the next day. See, these ideas that they have are contrary to what they actually believe. These ideas enter them through Iblis. Shaitan's always around us. He doesn't leave us alone. Shaitan's always, that's why you always need to be aware of this. Why is it an issue when it comes to this? Why are the majalis ever present, and why is it an issue when it comes to mourning of Imam Hussein alayhi salam? Let's look at this verse in the Quran. God bless you all on your recitation of the Holy Book, and because this is the most important thing alongside with the majlis, because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi left us with two things: Kitabullah, which you were reciting earlier, and his progeny, Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam. And if we hold firmly onto these, we will never go astray. In the book, in Surah Yusuf, when Allah Azza wa Jal speaks about Yaqub, He says the verse, وَتَوَلَّ عَنْهُمْ. The first, Yaqub turned away. تَوَلَّ عَنْهُمْ, it means he turned away from them. In other words, in Azal, he left everyone. He wasn't interested in anyone. Why? He says, وَقَالَ. He says, وَقَالَ يَا أَسَفَ عَلَى يُوسُف. That when he turned away from them, he said, my sorrow over who? Yusuf. Who was Yusuf? He was a prophet of God. He was a messenger of God. What happened to Yusuf? Was he massacred? No. Did Yaqub think he was massacred? No. Yaqub is a prophet of God. He knows the situation of Yusuf. But this state of Yusuf being away from him caused him to turn away from people. And then he says, Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ قَضِيمٌ. وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ means that he had lost his sight. From what? From grief. Grief over what? Was Yusuf killed? No. How many sons did he have? 12 sons. How many of them were missing? 1. He still had 11 sons. 1 son went missing and his eyes became blinded out of grief. Think about this. Yusuf, as I mentioned, wasn't an ordinary individual. But Allah even mentions that وَهُوَ قَضِيم. Do you know what that means? When we say someone قَادِم الْغَيْث, what does it mean? Someone that represses the anger, holds back. Allah Azza wa Jal, and Allah is the most truthful of speakers, says he was like this, yet he had really repressed his grief. He hadn't let it all out. And this was a bigger tragedy. Do you know how big this tragedy is? Just to give you an idea. When Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam is told about the massacre of Malik ibn Nuwayra, Ridwan Allahi ta'ala alayh, when Khalid ibn al-Walid slaughters him and his family and he violates his wife, Amir al-Mu'mineen said, if anyone hears of this tragedy and dies, it is nothing. إذا مات, it's nothing. Allah Azza wa Jal says all this grief that's made him blind, He says he was still repressing his grief. He hadn't let it all out. He was holding back. In other words, he was patient with all this, and he was still sabr. He was still patient over this calamity. The thing is, because in Islam, there is a thing, or such a thing as grief. It exists. Our problem is not grief in Islam. Our problem is when someone despairs. Someone gives up. You see those people, they lose someone and they just give up on life. For example, you meet somebody. I met a brother once in one of the cities. He told me that his mother had committed suicide. Imagine this. It's tragedy. And he said his uncles used to ridicule him when he was young. They said, your mother had no faith. Imagine this. Imana da'if, so much that she killed herself. And he said, all my life they would ridicule me over this. He said, as I grew up, I realized I shouldn't worry about what they say. I got to deal with God. And he said, I would come to the majlis of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein and I would do dua for my mother. This is all I'd do. I'd see what I could do. He never just despaired and said, all right, I'm from this kind of a life, I give up on life. Didn't despair. Continued. He marched on. Where? He kept marching in the direction towards Allah Azza wa Jal. Weeping in general isn't forbidden. Grief isn't forbidden. Because we are encouraged to weep over the fear of the Day of Judgment. We're encouraged to weep over divine retribution, yani punishment of Allah. We're encouraged to weep over our sins. When we read Dua Qumail, that's what we say. Abki. It's all about buka if you read in it. You know, you read in Dua Abi Hamza Thamali, Abki, I cry. And we mention what? That all I have is what? My tears. This is all I have. You're encouraged to cry here. Because we fear of our accountability on the Day of Judgment. Likewise, we are encouraged to weep over the calamities of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. We're not just told to cry, we are encouraged. Even to the point where the Imam says, then try to cry if you cannot cry. Cry. In fact, in the ziyarah, he says, Assalamu alayka ya sari'a dam'at as-sakiba. What does that mean? The Imam Hussein alayhi salam, ad-dam'a as-sakiba means the flowing tears. That he is someone that was killed and causes the tears to flow. Imam Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salam alayhi causes the tears to flow. This is what he's known for. Were others around, or were there times before the Imam where people used to mourn? Of course. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi had his son, sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi, when he had his son Ibrahim didn't live long. Lived for a year or two, maybe even 3. When he buried him, as if a single event you learn so many things, but of the things when he buried him, he wept over him. And he mentions this word. He said, Al-Ainu Tadma, that the eye tears, that he cries. He says in it, وَالْقَلْبُ يَحْزَنُ, and the heart grieves. He says, وَلَا نَقُولُ إِلَّا مَا يَرْضَى رَبُّنَا وَإِنَّ لِفِرَاقِكَ يَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ لَمَحْزُونُونَ. That we do not say other than what pleases Allah, but this is the Prophet speaking. This is someone with the most pristine character. says that we are bereaved by your departure, Ibrahim. It's not something that's simple. It's my son. The messenger of God saying, this is my son. This is not just anyone. So this is something that is there in terms when we have for weeping. In other stages, it was different. For example, when Sayyida Khadija alayha salam and Abu Talib alayhi salam died, the messenger of God called it what? The year of grief. So there was a year that year was called the year of grief for this loss. He didn't say, listen, bury him or bury her and that's it, forget it. 3 days we cry, or dubbul mas'ali. Don't talk about it again. It's over. Don't open this up. We don't need to hear this. But let's look at what happened when Hamza, salamullah alayhi, was killed. Rasulullah wept until he shook. And they would hear his crying because of what happened to Hamza. Because what happened to Hamza, you would not even do with an animal. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi was overcome by this. So this isn't something that is new. This is narrated by everybody. 2 more points that are linked to Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. One was during his khilafah. He was always the Khalif, he was always the Imam, but during where the people pushed him to assume this worldly role that they had usurped from him initially. He was asked about the whiteness of his beard. They said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, why do you not dye your beard? And I mean, we're talking about 30 years after the martyrdom of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Amir al-Mu'mineen, salamullah alayhi, said, we are still in bereavement. We're still grieving. Still grieving. Over who? He's still grieving over Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. 30 years later, when he buries Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says something very important. He says, this is after he buries him. This, you find this also mentioned in Nahj al-Balagha. He says, Inna sabra la jamilun illa ank. That, you know, in the Quran, we hear the verse, sabrun jamil, that patience is beautiful. But Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying this is a general statement for everyone. If I have a musibah, I have to say, Inna mubashir as-sabirun. بشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. The patient ones say, to Allah we belong and unto Allah we shall return. Why? Because they are patient for what? A musibah. But is there masa'ib that have no patience? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, yes, he says, sabr is beautiful and it is good except upon Rasulullah. There is no patience. You've lost everything. You know, sometimes when we talk about الشيء بالشيء يذكر, we talk about Imam Sahib al-Amr, people don't understand what we're missing out. We have lost we've lost, basically imagine someone cut off your oxygen supply. This is what we're actually missing. So even if you're having happy days or you're having sad days, you're still missing out on your oxygen supply. You have to do dua for the Imam. Even he teaches us in the dua, Allahumma inna nashku ilayka faqda nabiyyina wa ghaybata waliyina, that we are missing our Prophet. This is a tragedy. It's not something for us to even accept. This is not like losing a child. Even there, I have to be patient. Everything I have to be patient. Illa over Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. There is no patience. And then the Imam says, وَإِنَّ الْجَزَعَ لَقَبِيحٌ. That jaza, extreme grieving and distress, he says it's qabih. So general, he says, it's general, but there's an exception. He says, إِنَّ الْجَزَعَ لَقَبِيحٌ إِلَّا عَلَيْكَ. Jaza, you know, when someone says, don't, لا تجزع. Yes, لا تجزع. إلا على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. So when سماحة الشيخ last night mentioned, when we say حسين مني, when Rasulullah said this, وأنا من حسين, I need to understand that this musibah that we are here for, we are mourning Rasulullah. We are mourning Amir al-Mu'mineen. We are mourning Ahl al-Bayt salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'een. There is no patience over this calamity. And there is no jaza that's considered to be forbidden over this. So as someone you would see in this manner, yet people for some reason, it's okay for everyone else. Do you remember when there was a murderous organization? I don't like using the word terrorist, because terrorist by Western terminology means all of us. It means every Muslim. That's what the term means. It doesn't mean if it's a white person, it's usually someone with mental illness. Otherwise, he's a terrorist. So I don't like using their terms. Criminal organization called Sepai Sahaba in Pakistan. They had this leader called Azam Tariq. This guy was known for slaughtering the followers of Ahlul Bayt. In fact, he even killed a Muslim doctor from the other sect, not a follower of Ahlul Bayt, because his name was Dr. Hussein. They killed him because of his name. This is how bad they were. When he was killed and sent to the fire of hell to be with his master Yazid, when they killed him, if you see the photos of what his followers were doing, they were beating their faces, ripping their hair, beating their chests. Why? I thought this was haram. Because the reality of it, their issue is not with the actual actions. Their issue is with Imam Hussein alayhi salam. That's why when people mention on the 10th of Muharram, you say on this day, yeah, Imam Hussein was killed. You know? And so what? What do you want us to do about this? Just another death, another person, and they'll move it across like this. The whole thing, when it comes to these tragedies, is we have to remember them and revive them. And Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam shows this in a narration when he meets Ubaydullah ibn al-Abbas ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen, the son of Abu Fadl Abbas alayhi salam. When he meets him, he mentions this narration. He says, ما من يوم أشد على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله من يوم أحد قتل فيه عمه حمزة ابن عبد المطلب أسد الله وأسد رسوله. He said the worst day in the time of Rasulullah was the day of Uhud, where Hamza was killed. It was the worst day for Rasulullah. Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam saying, after he sees the son of Abu Fadl Abbas alayhi salam. And then he says, وَبَعْدَهُ يَوْمَ مُؤْتَى قُتِلَ فِيهِ ابْنُ عَمِّهِ جَعْفَرْ ibn Abi Talib. So after this was the killing in the battle of Mu'tah of Ja'far al-Tayyar. So Hamza's death was the worst. After this was Ja'far. Then he says, وَلَا يَوْمْ كَيَوْمِ الْحُسَيْنِ. But there is no day like the day of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. He says, ازدلف عليه 30,000 رجل يزعمون أنهم من هذه الأمة. See, the tragedy of Hamza, his enemies and his killers were what? Mushrikeen. There were people that wanted to kill even Rasulullah. and were intent on killing Rasulullah. In the battle of Mu'tah, they were kafirin. They were intent on destroying Islam. But in the case of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, on the day of Ashura, there was salah behind Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and there was salah jama'ah behind Umar ibn Sa'd. There were people that prayed. There were people that said the shahadatain. Yeah, there were people that claimed to be Muslims. There weren't people that claimed to be foreign from Islam. Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein alayhi salam, in this narration, is saying that they claimed to be of this nation, of this Islam. And then he said, كُلٌّ يَتَقَرَّبُ إِلَى اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ بِدَمِهِ. You notice when I introduced my discussion and I mentioned Al-Isaba that did what? Jahadu al-Hussein. Jahadu. Why is it mentioned Jahadu? Why is Imam mentioned Jahadu? Because they were in jihad fi sabilillah. That they were trying to gain proximity to Allah through the killing of Abu Abdullah. This is a way of life for them. If you notice, there's a story for Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi where he enters the masjid and he finds someone sitting in his spot. So he says to him, you are someone that's really intrepid. You're someone that's really courageous. That you're sitting in my seat. You know who I am. He says, هَلْ لَكَ فَضِيلَةٌ? Do you have some virtue that's better than mine? He said, yes. He said, you are really brave. What is it that you have that's better than mine? He said, when you do your khutbah al-Jum'ah, you curse Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said, when I do mine, where I'm from, he says, I curse Ali and Fatima and Al-Hasan wal-Hussein. So these are the type of people. These people were trying to gain proximity to Allah. Qurba ila Allah, Imam Zayn al-Abidin is saying, biqatl al-Hussein. Even Umar ibn Sa'd, when he sent the horses to trample the body of Imam, he said, Ya khayl Allah, rkabi. Wa fil Jannah, he says, wa fil nar. Wa fil Jannah abshuri. That you are doing, you're the horsemen, the cavalry of God. That you're doing something, good tidings, glad tidings, with paradise. And then the Imam says, وَهُوَ بِاللَّهِ وَهُوَ بِاللَّهِ عَفْوًا. He says, يُذَكِّرُهُم. So these people, they came to kill Imam, but while the Imam was reminding them of Allah. He says, فَلَا يَتَّعِذُونَ. They didn't listen. How many times Imam Hussein alayhi salam tried to remind them of who he was? He said, do you not know this person? Do you know that person? Do you know who I am? Even to the point, do you know the mercy of Abu Abdullah? That even Shimr ibn al-Jawshan at the last moments, he tried to dissuade him from what he's doing. Not because of fear of death. The Imam lahadat and he would have died. Just so, don't commit this. This is a point of no return. This is the mercy. Ahl al-Bayt were not, honestly, you cannot understand. One of the things that's mind-boggling with the, inshallah, you have the martyrdom of Imam al-Hasan Mujtaba very soon. And one of the things that always plays with my head, I never understand that after Ja'ada poisoned Imam Hassan, and he felt the poison, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, do you know what he did? He turned to her and said, go back to your father's house. He said, I don't want them to harm you when they find out about what you did. Look at his rahmah. This is how they deal with people. This is the mercy of Ahl al-Bayt salawatullahi wa salamu alayhim ajma'in. So even to this point, Imam Hussein, every time they killed someone, one more pure than the other, the Imam would keep calling them back towards paradise, back towards Allah Azza wa Jal. And they wouldn't listen until he says, حَتَّى قَتَلُوهُ بَغْيًا وَظُلْمًا وَعُدْوَانًا. That they killed him. They transgressed all boundaries. They oppressed. There was no reason for this. Then he looks towards Ubaydullah ibn al-Abbas. Because when he sees him, and he says to him, Rahimallah al-Abbas. He says, Rahimallah al-Abbas, فَلَقَدْ آثَرَ وَأَبْلَى وَفَدَى أَخَاهُ بِنَفْسِهِ. Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein alayhi salam says, basically the points of saying are different types of word for sacrifice in different levels, that he gave everything that he had of himself for his brother. He knew his position in this case. And then he said, حتى قطعت يداه فأبدله الله عز وجل بهما جناحين يطير بهما مع الملائكة في الجنة كما جعل لجعفر بن أبي طالب. So he said his arms were severed and Allah replaced them with wings that he flies in paradise with Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the one that also had his arms severed. And then he says, وَإِنَّ لِلْعَبَّاسِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى منزلة يغبطه بها جميع الشهداء يوم القيامة. Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein then says about Abu al-Fadl Abbas, to know who you are mourning and who you are present for. You know, when you have these days, Samahat al-Sheikh last night, I'm using his words, very important talk going on. Today we have everyone, they'll say this person's the Hussein of this time, the Amir al-Mu'mineen of that time. You know, it's normal, this is normal. In the political world, the Arabs are known for this, you know what I mean? But I want to say to the Sheikh, that's nothing. I think you've downed it a bit. These days, you know, when Fir'aun said, Ana Rabbukum, people were saying, I was Allah. You know, they're downgrading things now. Back then they would say, I'm God. Even some people believe that they are God today. When Dakius, and that, he said, I was God. They all say, I'm God. And these people, but now we have people that say it for them. They don't need to say they're God. He sits where he is and people say, this person, if he dies, he's like this. And this person, if he dies, he's like that. They'll call this person Sayyid al-Shuhada, that person. All different titles are given out like Pizza Hut vouchers. Whoever wants one can have one. So he says here, just to know who you're talking about. And him being buried alone and having a standard by himself and a station and a maqam by himself. Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein لا ينطق عن الهوى. He doesn't speak from his own desire. Says that the station and position for my uncle Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam, every not mu'min, every martyr, every shaheed, can you imagine? يعني باستثناء طبعا المعصومين, their stations above all stations. That goes without saying. From Adam to the day of judgment. Imagine every martyr yearns for the station of Abu al-Fadl. They're shuhada. Imagine their station's high enough as it is. But they look at the station of Abu al-Fadl Abbas alayhi salam. This is who you are here gathered to mourn over. You understand their station, and this is the revival of these majalis, and this is what Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi was saying. And this is why tonight was dedicated for this, to tell you the importance of mourning. This is the mourning part of the majlis. Inshallah, tomorrow night we will talk about the lessons we learn from Majlis Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, in terms of our rituals, in terms of our prayers and fasting and all these things, where we learn how to be better people from these majlis. I like to thank you all, honestly, for how quiet this majlis has been. And I'm really, and obviously people take this for granted, but a lot of you, English isn't your first language. And for the fact that you have listened, God bless you all. That, you know, sometimes you will sit and you give a lecture and people don't understand, so they sit around as if they are in a cafe. May Allah reward you all for your patience in listening to a language that isn't your first language. God bless you all. Ajarakum Allah. I'll leave the dua for Samahat al-Sheikh, but I always have to do dua for Imam Sahib al-Amr, otherwise my speech isn't complete. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم قل لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. والأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والأرواح موتاكم جميعا، ولقضاء الحوائج وقبول الأعمال وشفاء المرضى وغفران الذنوب وتعجيل الفرج وحسن العاقبة. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.